Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a great start to your day, good start to your week. All right, so today we're going to talk about a really cool, important topic, very interesting. And when I first learned about this, it was many years ago. It opened up so many doors for me, both as a guitar player and a songwriter, composer. It just opened everything up. And things that I was playing or writing that seemed kind of boring, kind of okay, but not that great, all of a sudden sounded much better and things got a lot easier once I discovered what this stuff is. So what are we talking about? We're talking about how composers and songwriters or guitar players use Counterpoint to write better music. Now, I thought, I might be able to teach this topic pretty well, but I know someone even better who could probably teach it even better than I can. Okay. So I bringing in a very special guest. I'm sure you know who he is. He needs virtually no introduction, but anyway, his name is Dr. Tommaso Zillio. Hello.
Hello, people.
All right. Oh, before we get started, everyone watching us live, let us know who you are and where you're from. We will also be taking questions live a little bit later on. So if you have questions, just write them in the chat and we will be happy to address them as we go. So, Dr. Zillio, doing well?
Doing well. How about you?
Very good. Very well rested. Very well rested. So, can you briefly define Counterpoint, what it is, and maybe in a way that, guitar players can understand, musicians can understand, who might not be that familiar with the concept or what it is or how it works? Can you kind of just briefly define it?
Well, I'm gonna give you the introduction to Counterpoint, and nobody gives you because it's so weird that people don't. But I want you guys to think about the plight of musicians in the 17th century. I mean, today, when you want to create music, you have lots of great instruments. You have the electric guitar with distortion and just a note or two sounds super big. You have power chords. You have synthesizer where even just a line of one note can sound super big, super fat, exciting. You have recording processes, reverb and stuff, etc. And even a kick drum can sound powerful and emotional. Now go back 300 years, 400 years, and what you get, it's a harpsichord. And that's what you get, okay? You have an instrument that has a sound, that's what it is, okay? It's not really powerful, doesn't have all that bass, it doesn't have all that, there's a good attack, but little sustain, no dynamic at all. On a harpsichord, if you press the key harder or weaker, it's the same sound. They didn't yet figure how to make dynamic come in. So you have a problem. How do you make this stuff sound emotional? The material was, the basic elements were quite poor, okay, from this point of view. I mean, respect to today, okay? So they had to figure out other ways, okay? And one way they figure out is if instead than playing one note at a time, maybe we play two notes at a time, okay? Or 3 or 4 notes at a time, okay? Oh, let me use something cleaner here. Okay, good. Okay, and then you start thinking about that instead, then it sounds better. It sounds bigger. It sounds more interesting, okay? And so things went exactly the opposite way than people think they do. Because today, when you study music theory, what do? You study chords, you study scales, you study harmony, and later you go into sound design. But in reality, this started as sound design, okay? How do we get this instrument, however poor it is, to sound decent? And so they invented harmony for this reason, essentially, okay? Now, one thing is to go and play all those with other notes in parallel, like we're doing right now. So for instance, I mean, you could think of, say, a G major scale, okay? And you could play all those deep stuff with some harmony, essentially, okay, to make it thicker. It sounds thicker. Even on the guitar, it sounds, to my ear, better. Depends what you're doing, okay? But all those notes are still moving all in the same direction. What you're getting is just the same thing, but thicker. At a certain point, the musicians started to figure out that, and again, it was an evolution. Now, first they were doing things only with one note, then with two notes, then with three notes. At that point, they started figuring out that if we have, say, two singers, and they sing, but they don't go up and down together, but they do different things, that will work even better. Okay? So rather than having all the people singing this way, okay, they were thinking, do this kind of stuff where the two voices, the two notes, move in opposite direction, or one stays still and the other moves up or down. Okay? And so they started exploring all these. And again, you have to remember, they had only that. That was the only way to create something that sounded better. It took quite a lot of time to get those instruments to sound bigger and more interesting. Now, if you're thinking, yes, but if I listen to orchestral instruments today, they sound great. The orchestral instruments we have today were not the orchestral instrument they had at the time, okay? Today stuff sounds different, okay? When you go at the movies, okay, and see the last movie, I don't know, Dune, with the soundtrack by Hans Zimmer, and you hear those super powerful brass on the background, okay? We invented those 100 years ago, pretty much, okay? And then also Hans Zimmer is recording them to give them even more power, okay? So they didn't have that, okay? So with those tools, they explore more harmony and other things to create a bigger sound. That's how it came from, okay? And that's what it is, okay? And we can still use it, because even if we have better instruments, okay, even if we can create a much thicker sound with one note using a synthesizer on a distorted electric guitar, we can also use this to create something even better. That's the idea. Okay, so that's kind of an introduction on how this whole thing works. Am I making sense?
Yes. Great stuff. Great stuff. And it's the historical aspect is not only interesting, but it's really quite important to understand Counterpoint in context and how it developed and why. And there are lessons there that we can take going forward. You know, it's not just arbitrary information, not just trivia is the point. Great. If maybe you want to play maybe a comparative example where you take a chord progression, even if it's simple, maybe play that chord progression without counterpoint, the way that, you know, like moving bar chords around or something like that. And then play maybe the same chord progression with counterpoint so people can hear the difference and why, what's making it sound different and how it sounds different.
Yes, we can do a few things. You see, the idea would be to start first from one line, one note. Which could be the bass note or the melody note. It's very easy to start from the bass, for instance, or doing these kind of things, essentially. Okay, so actually, you know, the easiest thing is actually to play some of their exercises. That's just to be more historically correct, if you want. You know, I mean, so let me do a step back here. Because that's another interesting thing. You know that everybody tells you have to practice your scales, okay? And everybody goes like, let's practice our scales. But that comes from exercises they were doing at the time when practicing the scale did not mean to play the scale up and down. It meant play the scale up and down with the left hand on a keyboard and the chords of the scale on the other side, okay? So stuff like this, okay? Or this. Okay, that's an actual original exercise the time exercise for the keyboard, okay, transpose on guitar. And this can be done, right now I did it in 3 voices, okay, meaning that there are 3 notes at every single time playing. And you know what, why don't we do it this way? Let's do some special effects, okay? So you can see what I'm playing, okay? The bass is gonna be just a C major scale, okay, going up and down. But I'm playing other 2 notes on top, okay? Oops. There's more than one way of doing it. There's just more than one way of doing it wrong, better. So let me do it again. This. Then you can come back. Temporarily exit even the key, because you can play an F sharp. It works. And they were playing this stuff in different ways, in different keys, all the time, until they had this under their fingers and the sound in their ear. That's, again, basic, simple counterpoint exercise, okay? Indeed, I wouldn't even define this counterpoint. I would say that this would be the stuff kids do before doing counterpoint, okay? Which is still pretty good for being what it is, okay? So that's an idea. If I had to transpose all this in a chord progression, modernly speaking, this would be C, G, C, F, G, F, G, C. It would be something like that, which doesn't have the same ring to it, right? I mean, it's not exactly the same. So that's the difference. Okay, imagine this. Or hear this. And back. Okay, and then of course they wouldn't limit themselves to that. They would start. They will add a little bit of embellishment on top to create an actual counterpoint piece, because the idea again is to try to get different melodies working on at the same time. So each one of those lines create a different melody, and you learn it first in a stark form, okay? So like just one note at a time, but then later you can take any of these melodies and then embellish all those melodies to create something that is more like music and less like an exercise. Okay, and that would be an example. Am I making sense? By the way, guys, if you have questions, you can write your questions in the chat, okay, or in the comments, depending if you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook or everywhere else. Okay, we are taking questions. So if anything I'm saying is not clear, or if anything I'm not, I'm saying you want more clarification, you want more information, by all means, write your questions. Okay, make sense so far?
Yes, yeah. Makes sense to me. If people have questions, as you just said, now is a good time to start asking. One little historical piece of information that people might find interesting. You referred to these exercises. Can you share at what age were these exercises? What age were these people who were playing for 35 years and they're 40 years old? You know, who was doing these kinds of exercises at the time, and in the 18th, 17th century?
Well, the history goes that the history, like all history, it starts from a very bad place, meaning we were in Europe in the 16th, 17th century, and there were plagues killing the majority of population all the time, because that's what happened at the time. So there were a lot of orphans. But those orphans were typically taken in by the church, or different churches, okay, and kept somewhere, and they were trying to teach them something so that they could in future have a job. And it turns out that in some places, like in Naples, in Venice, in Rome, some of those orphanariums were teaching music. And by the way, the Italian word for orphanarium is conservatory, like the conservatory of music. That's where it comes from. And especially in Naples, we have a lot left from Naples because they had 4 of them and they kept most of their archives. So we know the name of the people, the name of the teacher, the name of the kids, what they were teaching them, the order of the exercises, how they were practicing, etc., etc. So what I just played, it's called the rule of the octave. It's a very basic exercise, and it's typically taught to people who are, let's say, 9, 8-year-old, 10, okay, depending on where they are. They have their idea was to do that before touching an instrument. Attention here. Before touching an instrument, the kids were singing for at least 3 years, and not easy stuff. They were actually singing counterpoint stuff, even if they didn't tell them it was counterpoint. Like, okay, you sing this, you sing that, and they were hearing. Once they could hear this stuff, they finally put them on an instrument, and then they started teaching these kind of exercises. And the training was pretty grueling. Okay, it was sit down, practice this exercise until you have it under your finger, then do it in a different key, and then keep doing it until you have it under your finger in all the possible inversion, in all the possible position. And I want to make clear that this was happening. The typical practicing condition, it's not one kid in a room with one harpsichord, because they didn't have the means to do that. It's an orphanarium, okay? They had, let's say, around a dozen harpsichord in the same room with 40 kids taking turns. Okay, so they couldn't hear themselves, not really well at least. They were competing for harpsichord time. They were also teaching each other, by the way, because the older kids were teaching the younger kid. I mean, 11-year-olds teaching 9-year-old, okay, at this level. It was kind of a pyramid teaching scheme, but then again, that's what you have, okay? And the better you learn, the better are your prospects in future. So those kids were really motivated because the alternative is starving. So they did 3 years of singing, essentially. There's around 4 years, depends who you ask. But I mean, there are a few years of basic harmony training, which is the stuff I just played, plus variations, plus improvisation, because they were improvising with the stuff. They was all studied so that they could improvise. And then later they put actual counterpoint on top, meaning, okay, let's start studying all the possibilities of all those lines you already know, but they have vocabulary before doing the counterpoint. Okay. By the time those guys are 15, 16, they were human jukeboxes. Okay. Meaning you could take one of those people, put them in front of a keyboard, and this guy could improvise music for the whole evening. Okay. Improvise dance pieces, minuets, sarbands, all this kind of thing. Improvise shorter or longer pieces. They could write symphonies, imagining the sound and writing, and they had tricks for arranging all this stuff so they could arrange it for any kind of ensemble nearly in real time. Okay, comparatively, just to give you an idea, there is a summer in which Mozart composed 3 symphonies. That's from scratch to completely written score for all the instruments. You don't do this unless you have a system for doing it. Okay, it's too much work. He already knew how to set up all the arrangement. Okay, there are indeed a series of resources that those guys had called the dispositions, which is essentially pre-made arrangement of a series of harmony and other things and counterpoint pieces. So that as models, so when you compose your stuff, you already know how to arrange these for strings, woodwinds, etc. So all this stuff was a kind of a whole curriculum that was working to make those people complete musicians, improvisers, and composers. And then those people were sent around in Europe to teach other people, okay? Makes sense? Or to become human jukeboxes around the world. Now, I know the Italian schools better because, hey, that's also the language I can read. So I can read the stuff in original because, again, Italian. There were German schools too. They were a bit more formal and a bit less improvisational. Okay, there were French schools too, which were concentrating more on other things, especially arrangements and other things, because people were specializing, okay? But by and large, the system was pretty much the same across all Europe. And it's very different from the way we teach theory today, okay? It was very practical, very on the instrument, okay? Mostly on the keyboard again. But some people were trying to put this on the guitar with not much success because, again, the instrument, the classical guitar, it's harder to play than on electric guitar. All this stuff actually works better on electric guitar today if you were to do that on an electric guitar. Makes sense? But anyway, that's the historical content. The historical context, sorry. So that's or at least that's the historical context around the Baroque era, let's say. Okay.
Tommaso, before you move on, can I just summarize real quick
Go for it.
some key points? Because you went through them. I wouldn't say you went over them fast, but I really want to make sure people get these four little golden nuggets, especially if people teach guitar or teach anything else. Number one, this stuff was taught to kids. Number two, these kids were not necessarily special. They were just regular kids, happened to be orphans. The church took them in, put them in orphanages, and this was basically like job training. So when you grow up, you're not a bum, you don't starve to death, and you're not begging on the street. So these are 9 and 10-year-old kids, 11-year-old, whatever. They all learned it. These were not prodigies in the sense of having natural talent. They weren't special in any way. I mean, maybe one or two of them would have been special, but generally they're just regular people. Regular people. Kids picked it up. They learned it. This was something they could do. If they could do it way back then, anyone could do it today. That's first couple of points. The next point was these were group classes.
Yes.
Okay. So this whole idea, well, private lessons, this is the best way to learn, well, that's not how these kids learned it. And they grew up to be pros, and they were pretty badass. Okay. When they grew up. So these were not, amateurs banging on bar chords. I mean, these kids grew up to be serious musicians. I mean, those that continue. I mean, what other choice did they have anyway? So,
none.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Disease and starvation. That's
yes.
it.
Yes, they had an incredibly high success rate. Now, everybody became a competent musician. Then there were the greats. Sure, okay, the Scarlattis, okay, all the many of them essentially, but every one of them became a competent musician, good enough to play music. And then they were competing for the best places, okay? Because at the time, the way to make a living was to be hired by a prince or a duke or a count or somebody, so that you could be their musician, playing music for them, writing music for them, and all these kind of things. So there was quite a lot of competition too. Okay, it was a cutthroat world actually. Okay, more than the modern music industry in a sense. But the success rate was incredibly high. That's the idea. Anybody training enough was able to finally get enough coordination, enough rhythm, enough even inventiveness to play and improvise stuff, and becoming a professional good enough to teach. And those kids could not choose that. I mean, their parents died. They got put in an orphanarium. They didn't pick the orphanarium. They didn't pick the orphanarium when they were teaching other stuff. Okay, they were just put in there and taught this stuff. That's it. So when anytime you guys are thinking you don't have the natural talent, shut up and practice. Okay?
That's exactly where I was going with this. That's exactly it. And great. And the fourth point that I wanted to mention was, you mentioned Mozart. Now, as far as I know, Mozart did not grow up in an orphanage. That was not his history. And people think of Mozart as a genius, and he was, but, and this is a big but, there was already a solid foundation there that other kids in the area who in these orphanages would also have had. Now, he may have had something extra special, but the point is, it's when people think of him as a child prodigy and a genius and all those sorts of things, it's true, but the distance between the average and him at that time was shorter, much shorter than what people imagine. They imagine,
Yes.
okay, well, there's the farmer kid out there with the plow who doesn't know anything, and then there's Mozart, on the harpsichord or clavichord or whatever. It wasn't exactly like that compared to other musicians. So, not trying to take anything away from Mozart,
No,
but
actually,
there was this foundation, as you explained
yes,
earlier.
there was a foundation of music. Those people were born in a culture that gave you the tools and rewarded competence in music. Okay, so when Mozart is 2, his father was already teaching him how to play the keyboard. Okay, whatever keyboard instrument he was playing at the time. He was playing a kind of a early version of a piano, which is very different from the today's version of a piano. But not only that, but he was immersed in this culture. So once he became a child prodigy because he started when he was 2, okay, or even earlier. Okay, and then he took to it. But after that, he had to still study to become a good composer because he was mostly a player when he was a kid. And the first compositions by Mozart are meh, okay? I mean, I know people are like, they are still pretty good, but the first 4 piano concerto by Mozart sound like Haydn because they are copied from Haydn. No problem. I mean, at the time, copying was an accepted way of learning. Nobody got offended by that. Nobody give you a copyright strike. It was expected that you were doing that to learn. That's normal. And then Mozart was taught composition by Father Martini, who was one of the guys who studied, one of the orphans who studied composition in the orphanariums. And Mozart himself says that he finally found a teacher good enough for him in Father Martini.
So Mozart's teacher was an orphan who learned in group classes in the orphanage. There you go.
We have some of these documents left, and we have the exercises executed by his best student after Mozart, Stanislao Mattei. Another became a priest too, and we have his exercise book. So, I mean, it's beautiful. You can go today if you want. You can go and study on a digital copy of the documents that Mozart was studying from. It's like, guys, I love the digital age.
Yeah, but you read these platforms. You read these methods in the original Italian, old Italian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. You can find some translations online if you want to. It's not that it's fairly accessible. Some documents have not been translated yet. For some documents, we just have the facsimile copy. I mean, just the picture of the documents.
Well, maybe in your free time, Mr. Italian Doctor. Maybe in your free time you could do that for the rest of the world.
Translating a few, but that's the other thing is they didn't use many words. Okay? Most of the exercises are on the score, like play this, harmonize this with the numbers on top, and the numbers tell you what chord to play until you get the idea.
Figured bass.
There really were not that many explanations. That's the thing. I mean, it's a completely different method than today. When you grab a book and you have the long explanation, and then you do maybe one exercise. They were doing exactly the opposite. Was play until it's under your fingers. Okay, and which I like a lot, actually. It's way more.
And that forced the student to think. He was more responsible for his own learning. He had to take more accountability for his own learning. It wasn't spoon-fed every word, every demonstration, every analogy, every chart on the whiteboard. There was a whole lot less of that.
Exactly.
Anyway,
so here's a thing that they were doing and we can do, and it works beautifully for guitar, but it works beautiful for other instruments too, because like I said, they were improvising the counterpoint. How do you even start doing that? Okay, because the idea of counterpoint here today is that you sit down and you do all those calculations from this note, you can play this note. And when you play this note, maybe you can play this note, and then maybe going down and play this. And what they were doing instead is that they were starting with a bass structure. One possible basic structure was to play what today we call first inversion chords, so chords with a third at the base, and playing them all over the scale. Stuff like that. So essentially, I'm in the key of D major. It's a D major chord, but the bass note is an F sharp, so the third of the chord. And I'm playing the next chord, which is an E minor, but the bass is G. Then I'm playing the next chord, which is an F sharp minor, but the bass is A, not F sharp, and so on and so forth. And I have a G with the bass of B. Okay, at this point I'm doing something strange because I don't want to have the diminish, and I want to have the I don't like the minor here, I like this better, okay, which I'm playing a second inversion chord, but it's just because I like the sound better. Another first inversion chord, another first inversion chord. But basically I'm playing mostly first inversion chords. Okay? They were doing this on the keyboard, they were doing this singing, meaning you have three singers, one is singing the top, one is singing the middle, one is singing the bass. Okay? And then they were improvising on the piano, on the keyboard, or on the guitar if you guys want. You can improvise on the top voice, or you can improvise on the bottom voice. Okay, stuff like that. So you just play the chord, there we are, and then maybe take the top voice and go like, what if I move up and down a little bit? Stuff like that, okay? They were doing this on the piano, they were doing this with their voices. So you can have three singers. Every one of those singers is first learn how to sing the parts in here until it becomes second nature, which is not super hard to do. I mean, I'm not a singer, so my voice would be horrible, but one can learn to follow that. And once you get used to singing essentially this scale up and down, every kid, okay, every singer, whether it's the top, the middle, or the low voice, they start improvising a little bit. And at the beginning, only one of them improvises, and the other two just hold the chord. Then maybe two of them improvises, and the other just hold the note. And at a certain point, till three of them improvise, and more or less, they found their way around to a specific chord just by listening to each other. Okay, it's kind of they're just playing off each other. One of them sings some notes, the other tries to follow. One plays a few notes up and down. Okay, while the other below maybe does something like that, and the one below or something like that, all at the same time, until they're able to do something together. Okay? And again, this works because the explanations are very little. Okay? Just sing this like 15 minutes a day for a few months until you get it, until you know it. Then improvise something. In the meantime, you were also singing some melodies by yourself. Okay? What today we call solfeggio was this kind of exercises, not just the ear training stuff. I mean, it is ear training, but it's more than that. You can find people doing that today, okay? You can find on YouTube videos of people doing that, and it sounds wonderful because once people get a bit of competence doing that, the piece sounds super complex. It's different every time. They can go on and on and on until they're tired, okay? And it's always new. And they are improvising a counterpoint because at the end of the day, this chord here contains essentially a third here and a sixth here, which are the basic intervals of counterpoint. Okay, because those are the consonant interval, but not the perfectly consonant interval. So those are the intervals used mostly in counterpoint. And so naturally, you start to internalize all this. Okay? Once the singers can do this, you introduce a keyboard or organ player hitting the actual root of the chord, okay, and everything sounds even bigger. Makes sense? So that's what something they were doing, and you can do it on the guitar. I mean, okay, and then you just improvise. stuff like that. Okay, really basic. Okay, I'm not doing anything too complex. I'm not doing anything too technically difficult. I'm just playing whatever passes through my mind. Okay.
Very good. Do you want to maybe quickly show a second example of just like a chord progression, not using counterpoint, and then another one with counterpoint, just real quick?
Well, a chord progression that it's used a lot today, you've heard of it. It's the circle of fifths, you know. You've heard this a lot of times. It's typical also in jazz, you know. Okay, and it's the idea that you have you start from the root of the tonic chord. I mean, the key of C now. You jump to some other chord, say the third, and then you go down in fifths on the chords. So you play on C major, you play the E minor, the A minor a fifth below, and the D minor a fifth below, then the G seventh a fifth below, then the C again a fifth below. So you follow the circle of fifths. Well, they were doing something similar. Which I need to remember how they were doing it now. And that's the same progression with counterpoints. They start with those two notes, E and G, which it's the E minor chord. I have a C major chord, so from here, and they were lowering this note to create the seventh of the E minor. So it's from here to here becomes an E minor seventh, formally speaking. Now you have your a C and an A that is a shorthand for the A minor chord, A minor 7 chord, D minor 7, D, G7, C. It's hard to see how those two notes express those chords, but if you already know what are the chords expressed, it's easy to say that those notes are always inside the chord. You've heard this stuff. Okay, it's a circle of fifth progression. That's how a Baroque musician will do it, as opposed to how a jazz musician will do it. And then, of course, you also have people like Joe Pass who will take both ideas, okay, use the jazz harmony. No, I know I cannot play like Joe Pass. I'm not going to play the example, okay? But who will take the jazz harmony, will take the idea of counterpoint of having more than one voice at a time and create something using those things, right? Which sounds amazing, okay? Just go and listen to some Joe Pass. You know you will know when he does that.
Awesome. Well, we've got a good question here. I'm getting a little echo. If you can mute yourself just for a moment, Tommaso. We have a question, and I think this question is also a good segue to maybe talk a little bit more about the history. The question comes from our buddy Vince. Was counterpoint used more extensively in the Renaissance and Baroque eras than later periods? And I think you partially just addressed that, but maybe if you want to answer more explicitly.
Well, yes, it's used mostly in those eras because of the thing about of the instrument not being thick enough. But I mean, the whole story starts in the Middle Ages with Gregorian chant, which is essentially, let's take a bunch of people and all of them sing the same note at the same time. Okay. To us today, this sounds so obvious, but it wasn't really at the time. Okay. How do we make a lot of people sing together? There were systems to remember the songs and all this kind of thing. And I mean, from the basic idea of let's sing all together to actually being able to do it, there's a certain space. Okay, everybody needs to know the song. Okay, how do we communicate the song and all this kind of thing. So, but we started there. We sing all together. Then we started with people singing a fourth apart. So imagine your melody is something like, okay, and then later they were starting with stuff like that, or which sounds very archaic to us, like all those parallel fourths or parallel fifths. Okay. Then they started practically playing power chords. but again, only with their voices. And then eventually they started realizing that they could move in a different way. At this point, we get around the Renaissance period, where the idea was, let's see, the Renaissance musicians were thinking, okay, we can play more than one melody at the same time, and we can still be in consonant with each other. They started thinking, how many melodies can I play at the same time? So if you go in Renaissance Counterpoint and look into that, you have pieces with 30 independent melodies. Okay, look at Palestrina. Even if there are not 30 different notes, but the melodies move in so many different ways. So every singer is singing something different, essentially, but they all work together. And it's beautiful, by the way. In the Baroque era, they were like, okay, but let's not do 30 voices, but let's start to introduce some more interesting harmony that it's a bit more dissonant. So they started introducing already, in the Renaissance era, you use mostly fifths and fourths, occasionally a third, but the minor third was still considered dissonant occasionally. So in the pre-Baroque era, you have thirds, but in the Baroque era, they introduced the sevenths and all this kind of thing, and then the ninths, and then it starts to become a bit more modern, okay? Eventually, little by little, okay? But it's a very step-by-step evolution, okay? There's not big jumps, okay? You can go from the Gregorian chant to jazz without any real jump. I know a lot of people say that jazz is revolutionary, but it's not, because all the harmonic material of jazz is already in Debussy. Okay, and we get there gradually. So makes sense. So it was used more there. And again, it's all a matter that first, at the beginning, you have only some specific intervals that were consonant and some that were dissonant, and they wanted to really explore that. And second, that the instruments were kind of poor sounding. When you get later, when you get around the Romantic era, so let's say beginning of the 19th century, we start having better instruments, and so we start leaving the counterpoint back a little bit and not being so heavy only on counterpoint, and actually starting to use those instruments playing single line, single melodies, or specific harmonies, but less counterpoint-like and more parallel-like, okay? Everybody knows Beethoven's Fifth, right? Okay. But do you guys know why Beethoven's Fifth sounds so powerful? It's the first symphony written that contains trombones. Before, there were no trombones, okay? So that bombastic sound he gets there is because he got the new instrument, and he was one of the first one to use it. He was one of the first one to find the instrument, realize the instrument exists, find people who play the instrument that are good enough to play on the symphony, hire them for the symphony, write a piece for them, and actually rehearse the whole thing to get the sound. You don't just write, you have to go through the whole process. Makes sense? Oh, somebody else is asking on Facebook, how would you use counterpoint in blues progression? That's fun. That's fun. A bass player would use counterpoint in blues progression. A bass player could improvise listening to a solo player and trying to get interesting melody in that. Now, one of the things that we got fixated in counterpoint, and we shouldn't be, is that when people think of counterpoint, they always think about the interval between the two notes. And they're like, there are some intervals that are accepted, some intervals that are not accepted, and they need to be resolved, etc. So I'm answering the question in blues so you guys know what I'm going, okay? But, and counterpoint was taught in a specific way, like let's do one note against one note, one note against two notes, one note against three notes, and two notes against three notes, and all this kind of thing. So we got fixated in that. But at the end result, one thing that made counterpoint work is that the two melodies, sure, they have the right intervals, but they have different rhythms. This was a big part of their training, but it's a part of the late training, so we are left with less written exercise. And so all the harmony book you read gloss over this because they get in love with the beginning of the thing, but they don't know the end of the thing. Okay? But a big part of creating a counterpoint was that the two melodies, or the three or the four or whatever, had different rhythms. So one modern way of studying counterpoint is to not use any note, but just try to do different rhythms. Okay? So for instance, one exercise I've done with a few people is one of us plays a rhythm, and another one tries to play a complementary rhythm on top, and then I'm changing my rhythm, and he has to change his rhythm, and we need to create a rhythmic counterpoint where we never play the same thing. We can coincide occasionally, we can not coincide occasionally, but it has to feel like two rhythms playing off each other. Kind of like a drum circle, if you want, only a bit more elaborate than that. And with the idea that if somebody's matching your rhythm, you have to get out and do something else, okay? You need to always try to play against the other, still in time, but against the other. Good. How can you use counterpoint in blues? The guitar player and the bass player, the guitar player and the piano player, the singer and the guitar player, okay, has to play this game. Forget about the intervals for a moment. You have already a language in blues, okay, which is pentatonic, blues scale, specific intervals. So don't go and copy the Baroque language because you have yours, okay? But just think rhythmically, okay? The singer has a melody. You probably know that melody. Can you play something that complements that melody? So when the singer is singing a lot of notes, you can hold a long note. When the singer is holding a long note, you can play a lot of notes. Okay? Don't worry about what notes you're playing. You already have that language if you can improvise in blues. Just start thinking about rhythmically how to complement all that. Am I making sense? That's something that good blues players do, by the way. Okay? You may notice. Think of Eric Clapton. Okay? Eric Clapton has some good things and some bad things. Okay, he's not super technical, and some of his solo sounds all the same, but he gets those done really well. One thing I've noticed that Clapton is doing, obviously when he's singing, but also when other people are singing, is always trying to complement what the singer is doing. Okay, of course, when he's singing, it's obvious because he's singing, then he's playing, then he's playing, then he's singing, then he's playing. But when somebody else is singing, he's actually listening to the singer and it's not playing all over the singer. And when he's playing over the singer, maybe because he studied it, maybe because he has a good ear, maybe because by trial and error he got it eventually, but he's singing notes that are consonant with the singer. There is a song by Sting. It's Probably Me. That's the name of the song. As far as I remember, the guitar solo in that song is played by Eric Clapton. At a certain point, there is a guitar solo and there is a sax solo at the same time. So they are playing off each other. And if you want to hear how counterpoint sounds in modern music, that's one of the best examples. One plays a phrase, the other plays a phrase, and they make it work together. Okay? Now, you may like the style or not, but that's how you use counterpoint in blues. You take the idea, not the literal implementation, not the details. You take the idea of counterpoint, of creating something that complements what other people are doing.
Very good. Excellent stuff. Tommaso, maybe
Yes.
we can quickly discuss some easy ways that people can get started using counterpoint or voice leading, who maybe don't have a lot of experience with it. Maybe they're somewhat familiar, but they're not really sure, how do I do this? How do I learn this? What should I do? What's the next step?
Good. A good starting point will be to start playing tenths on your guitar. What's a tenth? You guys know what's a third, okay? It's the distance between, say, C and E, or D and F. So essentially, you play one note, leave the next note like C, leave the next note, which is D, unplayed, and play the note after that. So play C and E. Jump one note. That's a third. And you can do these all over the scale. Okay? It's a starting point, right? It sounds better on the guitar if once you do this, you take the top note and you move it up an octave, so you play this. So I have a C and an E, but at the higher octave. Okay, and you start by playing this scale, essentially. Okay, you fool around a bit with that. Okay, once you get the idea, once you know the structure of this, okay, you start holding the low note and then improvising with the top with the top voice. Okay, so rather than just playing these, and these, you play this kind of thing, or you improvise with the bottom voice. It's much harder to improvise with the bottom voice because it's technically difficult. So start with the top voice. But the idea is you establish this little easy-ish structure, okay, and then you improvise a bit with the top voice and just try to have fun with that and see where this takes you. Okay, it has to start again more with you trying to take out some music from it rather than having very specific instruction on anything. Okay, it's more of an improvisational practice than very structured, do this, don't do that. Okay, so I will start from there and taking it easy and see how this takes you. And by the way, if the sound of the major scale keeps you down, okay, takes you down because it's just the whole major scale, do the same in a minor scale. Okay, and then or a harmonic minor scale. So it sounds a bit more interesting than just the major scale.
All right, excellent stuff. Okay, Tommaso, I believe you have something that people could access, download,
Yes,
a resource for free. Can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. So can you put it? Can you? Thank you very much. Okay, so let me move a little bit. Thank you. So that's, like I said, in Counterpoint, you have a specific vocabulary, you have specific structures that you do to sound good. This is true also in modern music. So, for instance, we're talking about pentatonic and blues and the language of blues and how this language entered into all modern music. And one thing I did is I collected 18 tips taken from solos of the greats. It's not just I took a leak. I examined all the solos I could imagine of the greats, okay, the great like Clapton, Beck, okay, Hendrix, and all those kind of guys, and found that they are following similar patterns, and not just scale patterns, but specific patterns of after this note, play this thing, or that's a trick that you can use in several different ways, and so on and so forth. So you could, to get more that kind of flavor of the original guitar solos, if you want, you could take this ebook here and learn a few of those tips. Even learning a couple will make a big difference because those are not just licks. Those are the stuff with which you make licks. You learn one of those and then you can create licks over and over and over. They are lick generators, not licks. Okay, so this stuff becomes your own. My suggestion is they download this ebook. It's completely free. Okay, you download it. You also see me playing all this stuff because with the ebook come also a series of videos. Try to play all the 18 tips. Pick the 2-3 that you like best and start playing them and using them and working with them and creating stuff with that. And you'll see that you will never anymore have the problem that I don't know what to play in a solo, okay? Because you're going to have those things in mind, and those are going to guide you, and they will give you a starting point for every solo. So go, download it. It's free.
Excellent. And I also have something free for you guys. It's called Guitar Mastery Decoded. You may have noticed that when Tommaso was improvising earlier on, just towards the end, he was talking about taking the thirds, taking the high note, putting it up an octave, and then he started improvising with the high note, and then later he showed you how to improvise with the bottom note. Now, I can imagine that some of you might be thinking, well, how does he know what note? Where's he getting those notes from? I understand how he's got the third. I can kind of figure out, put it up an octave. Now he's got the 10th. But these notes that he's improvising from, where do I find those? Where are those notes coming from? And how do I recall those notes very quickly? Like, he didn't have to sit there and think, okay, I'm in the key of C. I'm playing the 10th off the D note. So I've got D, and then I got F, a 10th higher. What are the notes around that F note that I got? He was just able to just do it. Okay. And that's what my ebook is about. It's not about those specific exercises or improvising off the 10ths, but it's about learning where the notes are, where the functions are. So you're not just knowing where G is, but you understand, oh, I'm now playing the 5th of this key in this point, and you understand where things are, and you can recall them so that it's usable. There's a lot of different ways that you can learn how to find the notes on the guitar, but once you find them, now what? What do those notes mean? What are their functions? How do they work? Which ones should I choose? That's the next level that people kind of get stuck on after they learn where the notes are. So this ebook is totally free, doesn't cost anything. Will help you to learn the notes on the fretboard, what they are, where they are, how they fit in context of a key, over chords, over scales, etc. So download that free ebook. It'll cost you nothing. All right, let's bring Tommaso back in here. Thank you, Tommaso, for everything that you shared with us today. It's great stuff. Great. I find the history, fascinating, as well as how you're using these concepts to improvise and to write and to play. It's just a lot of fun. And I think it's a lot of fun for people watching us live and the recordings in the future. Thanks also for people who ask questions. That was good stuff there as well. Until next time, take care, everybody. Thank you, Tommaso.
Thank you.